Everybody, welcome to the Let the Justice Roll Down, Part 1. We're doing racial justice tonight with my friend Osheta Moore. So I'm going to introduce her. But I am, yes. And I am so glad you're all here. We're looking forward to having these conversations over the next 4 weeks on the issues of racial justice, disability justice next week, housing justice. And Kevin showed up. Dude, you're here, man. I'm like, you're not speaking tonight. You just came. That's so great. So Kevin from IOCP is going to be with us in a couple of weeks. And then LGBTQIA justice with Ellie Krug. So if you have been around here for a little while, I've not met her in person yet, but I cannot wait to meet Ellie. She's going to lead us through that last one. But tonight is Osheta. So Osheta is a pastor, speaker, mother, and wife. And she's passionate about peacemaking, racial reconciliation, and community development in the urban core. Osheta serves as pastor of community life at Roots Covenant Church alongside her husband, TC. And she's passionate about equipping the church to be everyday peacemakers. And honey, could you hold up that book right there? So Osheta has written a couple of books. Shalom Sisters is her first book. The second book is called Dear White Peacemakers. And I'm carving my way through it, and it is gorgeous. It is such an important book. She has written it with so much heart and passion and compassion and grace, which is just, it's about being the beloved, right? So I love that. So please consider getting that book because it'll really help you. She's also completing her 2-year program to be a spiritual director so that she can help equip peacemakers with practices and prayers for the journey. You can follow Osheta on Instagram at Osheta Moore for encouragement. And do you still do like your thing, the breath prayers and stuff that you did for a while? Not as much. Okay, well, when the pandemic started, she said, hey, let's get together on Instagram and do breath prayers. And then hundreds of people said, sure.
Yeah.
So that's great.
It started as accountability for me, and then people showed up. And I was like,
that's awesome. So I hope you are encouraged. I hope you're challenged. And I hope you open your heart to receive all that Osheta has to offer. So she's going to do a talk, and then we'll have 30 minutes or so at the end. Actually, we'll have 30 minutes or so for Q&A. So think about our Q&R probably. Less answers, more responses, right? Who knows? So bring your questions, and let's give it up for Osheta.
Let's start this over.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. See that band all dressed in white. God's gonna trouble the water. The leader looks like the Israelite. God's gonna trouble the water. Ooh, wade in the water. Oh, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God is gonna trouble. God's gonna trouble the water. Oh, see that band all dressed in red. God's gonna trouble the water. Ooh, it looks like the band that Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. Oh, wade in the water. Oh, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God is gonna trouble, yes he will, the water. God is gonna trouble. God's gonna trouble the water. There's healing trouble the water. Deliverance in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. My God is gonna trouble the water.
I once heard a story about Harriet Tubman that I am sure is exaggerated and therefore mythologized. Quite often in the retelling of their stories, our favorite heroes move from ordinary people who were brave enough to show up in extraordinary circumstances to superhuman badasses, the likes of which will never be. This story is about one of Harriet Tubman's trips to lead a group of enslaved people to the north. After a few days of traveling, they heard hounds baying and in pursuit. So they moved their caravan to the river where they hid for several days, slowly trudging in the water, taking rests when they could, keeping an ear out for the barking of the dogs and the gallops of the slave patrols on their horses. They were hungry, thirsty, sore, and cold. The children and babies were struggling to hold in their cries. The mothers were worried about them and their families. The group was tense and they were anxious as they made their way to freedom, exhausted from this hard journey already. You see, when they were introduced to the Negro spiritual wade in the water as enslaved people, they knew that it was their way of communicating to each other about how they're going to, the strategies behind their leaving of their enslavement, what they needed to know about the path along the way. These songs were encoded messages to their freedom. And so they would sing these on the plantation. And they knew that wade in the water's encoded message was to tell them to stay in the water so as to confuse the bloodhounds used to track them. But singing something on the plantation while you harvest and process the cotton, while you dream of freedom, is completely different than actually living it out, feeling it in your body. Because wading is messy. Wading is dangerous. Wading is confusing. Wading often makes you long for the solid ground of the plantation because at least that's a discomfort you're used to. So in this group, this tired, hungry, cold, confused, overwhelmed group, one man stopped abruptly, and the procession behind him stuttered to a halt. Some of his fellow journey people fell into the water, making a dangerously loud splash. Harriet whipped around and glared at the man. "Hush now," she hissed. The man, dripping with water and rage, walked up to Harriet and announced that he was leaving the group. He was done. He would go back to the plantation and throw himself at the mercy of the master, and whatever fate befell him, whatever happened to him, was harder and better than this hard, terrible, frustrating, cold, exhausting slug on the way to freedom. So Harriet looked around at the group, and she knew that if this man went back, if he got out the water, he would alert the men that were searching for them at that very moment. And then those men would come and capture the entire group, herself included. So the story goes on to say Harriet pulled a gun from the pocket of her skirt and pointed it directly at the man and said, "You have a choice then. You can die now or keep walking. We're getting to freedom, and you will not stop us." Harriet cocked her weapon and waited. Others in the group began to whisper their pleas to him to stay. Some appealed to his sense of self-preservation. "You don't want to die." Some begged him not to cause a ruckus and get them all caught. Harriet stood quiet and resolved, revolver ready. The man looked around and realized that suffering together for the sake of freedom was far better than dying in that hypothermic river. So he held his hands up, apologized to Harriet Tubman, his Moses, from the oppression of the plantation, and got back in line, continuing to wade in the water, even though it cost him his comfort and even though he had very little hopes for the journey. When I enter into a conversation about racial justice, particularly when I'm in a room full of white peacemakers, I say, you know what? We're a lot like the man, the exhausted, frustrated, overwhelmed, angry, done man. We get discouraged pretty easily in this work. Maybe you've looked around and you've seen how we cannot ignore race anymore. It's no longer enough to be polite, you've got to be proactive, right? So you're reading the books and you're sitting in conversations like this and you're learning from people of color and your empathy and your desire to lean into the work is growing. But it's one thing to realize that the world has a problem with race after we watch a man die for over 9 minutes. And a completely different thing years later to continue having conversations about race and coming back to that violence, bringing ourselves back into that discomfort. Maybe some of us say, maybe I'll just choose some blissful ignorance for a while, because that's a discomfort that I'm used to. That's a discomfort I can live with. But the thing about racial justice, and the thing about becoming an anti-racism peacemaker, is that we are continually making our way out of that mindset. And we have to know that when we do that, we're going to run into trouble. Not when, or not if, when. When we run into trouble, we need to know what is our North Star. We need to know what it is that we are working our way towards. You see, that man looked around and he saw the community that was with him. He saw Harriet, the person who was leading him out of his enslavement. He was reminded that hard was really hard, and you don't want that hard anymore. You might not even live to live that hard anymore. He was reminded that on the other end of this, you're going to get out of the water and back into land, and you're going to make your way to freedom. And so you have to make the choice. Are you going to wade through the hard and the frustrating and the overwhelming? Are you going to figure out a way to manage your anger and your frustration and your fear? Or are you going to give up? What I have learned in doing this work is that we have to have a vision for our anti-racism work that is as compelling as freedom from enslavement. We have to have a vision for our anti-racism work that is rooted in community, that reminds us that the decisions we make and the things that we do don't just affect us, but others. We have to have something that brings us together so that we can stay in the water together. And so this is what I have often begin our conversations with, is that we're going to talk about racial justice, but you're not going to get a bunch of facts and figures. We're not going to get new arguments to pull out when you're in a conversation about race. Those are things that you can access pretty easily. The conversation we're going to have is, what is our posture in this work? The conversation we're going to have is, what is our goal, our end, our North Star? Not just to accumulate more information or more knowledge or create more policies or have more diversity. These are all good things, but these are short-lived things. There's no sustainability in that. We're going to look at our hearts, and we're going to look at the particular ways that this work kind of triggers some brokenness and some questions and fears in us. And then we're going to hold those together in community and as people of faith in the presence of God. Because see, what I worry about whenever I have conversations about race, and what I worried about the most in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, was that so many people were entering into this work with a legalistic posture of read this, say this, protest here, which is always shame-laden and hustle-bound. So I think we need a different way of having this conversation, one that gives us that North Star to freedom. So the group in this picture here is a group that I spent a significant amount of time with when I was on staff at Woodland Hills. Woodland had a 9-month discipleship program called SOMA, and it was geared towards people who were particularly curious about the teachings of Jesus and how those teachings of Jesus affected and was relevant to their lived experience, and then how they could take their discipleship over those 9 months into their particular contexts. And because this group met in a historically Black community known for a significant amount of violence, a huge part of their discipleship was bringing me in almost every other week to discuss the intersection between the peacemaking ethic of Jesus and the current conversations we were having about race. Now, this was before George Floyd. And so when I came into this, we were actually talking about things like Philando Castile and some other instances of violence towards people of color that were racially motivated, racially charged. And one of the things that I noticed about this group is that they were so incredibly eager for information, but the more information I gave them, the more they would begin to spin out. Because then they realize, oh, that's something I didn't know, or now I'm wrestling through this, and I have to figure out how this makes me feel. And so I would sit with them, and I'd be like, yes, this thing actually happened in history. We do need to be talking about the real experiences of people of color in our country because of white supremacy. This actually happened, but then it would throw them into this shame spiral that I would be sitting with and trying to figure out, okay, how do I get you past this shame spiral? Because now you're stuck here, and I can't give you more information, and I definitely don't want to give you something else to do, because you're going to go do that thing to fix your shame, but that shame is still sitting there. So one of the things that I noticed about this group too was that the kinds of questions that they were asking me were questions that were like, well, tell me exactly what to do in this instance. And I would say, I can't tell you exactly what to do in this instance. I don't know the people of color that you're having a conversation with. So what I can tell you is how to enter into that conversation from a really grounded place. What I can tell you are maybe some words that you want to avoid saying, but I'm not going to give you exactly what to do. And that kind of just became the thing that I spun around with. Every time I interacted with them, it's like, I want to give you information throws you in a shame spiral. So then I try to address your shame spiral by sitting with you, but that doesn't feel like enough because you're like, oh my gosh, you're wasting our time. And so then I just kind of was like, how do I get them to this place? So we were on a trip together. We culminated at that time together by going down south, which is one of my favorite things to do, is take a group down south and visit historic places on the civil rights movement. We go, we spend time there, we learn. And one of the things which I kind of realized was why I was like a budding spiritual director is I would be like, let's take time and be silent in this space. How does your gut feel in this space? What is the Spirit saying to you in this space? But see, the thing about that is I was doing that with them, and I was really realizing that there was a lot of shame, and there was a lot of the violence that we were looking at was kind of getting on the inside of me in this trip. And I realized that I didn't even have a North Star. So that's why I was struggling to give them more information or give them next things to do, because all I've been taught in doing anti-racism work and teaching anti-racism was facts and figures and history and books and knowledge. And this kind of came to a head on this trip when I was sitting by a lake. We were camping, which I don't recommend you do when you're dealing with hard stuff. When you're looking at brokenness, violence in our country, get a really nice hotel to go to that evening. Don't camp. But we were camping, we were set up camp, and I was sitting by the lake, and I just realized that there was this deep anger and almost this resentment that was building up in me because I was feeling like I wasn't helping them get to the next place of their anti-racism journey. I felt like we were stuck in the miasma of shame and defensiveness and frustration and arguments. And I was like, I didn't know how to hold that. And so I called my friend and I was like, I feel like the violence of what I have been looking at for the past few days with this group is affecting the way that I'm viewing them. I feel like I'm getting a little bit hardened towards them. I'm looking at images of people who look like them doing horrible things to people who look like me or people that I love, and I just don't know how to companion these people anymore. And she was like, thanks for calling me. She was a black woman. She's like, I know you can do this. You are called to teach them how to access the shalom of God in this work. So where does the shalom of God need to enter in for you? And I was sitting there and I was remembering that we had just spent time at the King Center, where we were exploring this very briefly exploring this idea of the beloved community. And I came back to everything that I had learned from Nowin about belovedness, and I just kind of sat there with that, and it really settled in me in a way that just made me okay to go back to my tent and go to sleep and wake up the next day. Now, the next day was a full-on travel day. It was the end of our trip. So we were on our way home, and we were at a gas station, and one of the women in our group, I could tell I was watching the progression of her shame spiral through the whole week, and I could tell that she was just done, and I could tell that just one more thing would cause her to have a breakdown. And I have no idea what it was, but I came out of the gas station and she was just weeping. She was leaned up against the wall of the gas station right by the bathroom, and just weeping. And for a moment, that violence kind of popped up. I was like, good, she's feeling it. She's feeling the weight of this problem. But then the Spirit said, no. You had a chance to access your belovedness last night, and you held that up against what you've experienced on this trip. She hasn't had that chance. And so I went over to her, and I hugged her, and we talked, and I kept saying over her, you're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. You are beloved. And slowly she started to calm down and take some deep breaths. And so then I went back to that group, and I started asking them this question that I learned from Ruby Sells, who was a civil rights leader. I started asking them this question: where does it hurt? And then we would explore how Nowin's work of belovedness intersected with that space of where does it hurt. So then I kind of took this. I remember standing in George Floyd Square, watching so many white peacemakers protest. I saw an older couple giving out water, and I saw a young family with their littles, and I saw teens holding up signs, and I thought, this is beautiful, but what now? What's next for them? Where do they go when the books and the classes and the conversations are not enough and they're in danger of leaving this work? Do we have to have some act of violence towards a brown body every time to instigate a communal conversation and movement towards racial justice? That doesn't seem like the God that I know, that says every single one of us are made in God's image. Why would God want an image bearer to be harmed just for us to have a conversation of how we can do better? So I started asking myself, why is this idea of finding a way to have this conversation in a sustainable way, in a way that invites people in? Why is this a conversation that we don't have enough? Why is it that we feel so stuck in moving forward? Why is it that we have a hard time having these conversations respectfully and kindly, with empathy with one another, in such a way that maybe we don't end up with full-on agreement, but we are still for each other? I mean, because I'm sure that man was like, I fully don't want to stay in this cold water, but okay, Harriet, I am for you. I am for them, so I'm going to stay in it. And here's what I noticed. So when we talk about this work of racial justice, there are kind of two thoughts that have emerged over time that are really good thoughts and really good ways of approaching this work, but in and of themselves are incomplete. So the first one is racial reconciliation. How many times have you thought about this work and maybe you've called it something like racial reconciliation? And this is basically the idea that, there's neither male nor female nor Greek nor Jew. We're all made in God's image. When I look at you, I don't see color. And just having conversations about color is divisive. And so we're going to be reconciled to each other because we're all made in Christ's image. And so racial reconciliation has been particularly used in my life by people who are like, I do want to have a conversation about race. I want to look at you and say, I know that maybe things are not so great for you, but I don't want to look at all of the hard. I don't want to talk about that. I just want to say, Jesus loves you. You're made in God's image. We're all image bearers of Christ. We all have hard things. And we don't really look at sort of the problems that happen because of the sin of white supremacy. Particular ways that people of color have been marginalized and oppressed and harmed, and their flourishing, their ability to access belovedness has been stunted or prevented because of the lie that people with European features are better or should have more resources or more access to resources than people who don't. Racial reconciliation kind of just wants to say we're all starting at the same line because of Jesus. And so if we do talk about race in any way, it's Martin Luther King Day, or it's International Sunday. Bring your favorite meal from a culture that's really meaningful for you, or a culture that you represent. It's maybe singing a song in Spanish and being like, wasn't that fun? But then like not actually sitting with a Spanish-speaking person for whom they pray in that language and say, was that translation right? Was the accent in the right place? When you sang Jesus Loved Me, did you sing it this way or this way? So racial reconciliation is really beautiful in some ways because it gets us to this place of grace that says we are all in need of God's love and God's provision and God's care for each other. We want to live in community. It's that beautiful kind of instinct that says, I don't want this to be a bad experience for you. I want this to be a good conversation. So we kind of just stay there, but we don't go deeper into the discomfort. So it's a graceful way or a gracious way of having this conversation, but there are a few problems with it. One, it focuses on a personal posture as your indication of internalized racism. So whenever I am talking to somebody who's been deeply influenced by mostly like a racial reconciliation framework, I don't have any problems with any people of color, or I've never seen that in my community. So we probably don't have a problem with that. And if people of color are saying something about it, then there must be something else that's going on with that. It's not anything to do with the color of their skin, because I know that I am good and kind and respectful and loving to them, and everybody that I know, like all my friends who I see interacting with them, they're good and kind. So we don't have that problem. So the problem with racial reconciliation is that we put a high value on our own personal posture as the indication of a problem of race or lack thereof. To that end, then it downplays or ignores systemic racism. So then it says, oh, well, I wouldn't mind reading a book written by a person of color to kids at story time. So the fact that the librarian doesn't read that, doesn't have anything to do with systemic racism, where maybe she just doesn't know. Well, maybe there's a problem that she doesn't know. What is contributing to the fact that she doesn't know is because she's not curious, because she's not exploring the fact that books written by people of color are not always promoted by publishers the same way that books written by people with European features are promoted. So it kind of like downplays or ignores that there might be a systemic issue there. And so then that creates obstacles to be truly multicultural in your church. Here's an example of this. So when I was a teenager, I went to a mostly white church. And when I was 17 years old, a man who looked just like my father, a black man named James Byrd Jr., was horribly assaulted by 3 white men, one of whom he was like a good acquaintance, like he trusted this person. They did horrible things to his body, including defecating on him, and then they tied him to the back of a truck and dragged his body, and they found his remains along the way, and then his torso was thrown into a cemetery that was designated for the black people in that small Texas community. I'm from Texas. So I heard this on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and I looked at my dad watching the news coverage, and I wondered, how is my dad feeling looking at this man? And for the first time, my really stoic dad had like tears welling up in his eyes. And I felt this deep sense of sadness because I had to go to church the next day, to youth group, and I knew that my youth pastor wasn't going to say anything about it. And I knew that I probably couldn't bring it up to him, or else I would get, oh, Osheta, we're all made in God's image. Christ has died for all of us. And if something happened to him, maybe we have to ask some questions about why he was walking along the road at 4 a.m. So I spent that whole week just deeply lonely, and the mentors who I trusted for my spiritual formation, I felt like I could not go to. So that's racial reconciliation. That's a problem. Because if I am in a church and I can't bring my full self as a person of color to conversations about race, the good, the bad, and the ugly, then I can't be truly in unity with you. So that's racial reconciliation. So then what I noticed after this was that there are so many anti-racism resources that were just bought up, and there's so many conversations about anti-racism. And see, anti-racism is really, really helpful in some ways, because here's what anti-racism does really well. Anti-racism begins with, we have a systemic problem, and now we have to talk about this problem, and we have to be really real with each other about this problem. We have to sit in this discomfort. It's really leaning into that, like wading in the hard and the slog of it. Like, white people, you need to use your voices. White people, don't center yourself. Don't use your voice. Stay quiet. Let people of color speak up. White people, if your pastor isn't talking about race, leave that church. White people, if your pastor isn't talking about race, stay in that church and be a witness. There are so many calls to action because of the awareness of the systemic problem of anti-racism. What anti-racism did really well was say that this is not something that we're just going to fix by being really kind to each other. This is something that we're going to fix by having strategic conversations with one another and actually looking at some of the problems in our country. But see, the problem is we look at some of these problems, and baked into that is this defensiveness and this fear that you're going to be shamed or harmed or disrespected or undermined in the work, in the conversation. So I get that, when anti-racism was all the rage and everybody was talking about it, there was this group of white peacemakers who were saying, okay, I want to do that, but I've done that and I got yelled at online by somebody. Or I want to do that, but I spoke up in a meeting and then somebody told me that I shouldn't have spoken up. And now I'm confused and I don't know what to do. So you know what? I'm just going to go back to the plantation. That's a discomfort that I can deal with. So anti-racism is great because it calls us into the grit, that take up your cross and follow me work that Jesus says is indicative of a disciple. It says, hey, I'm Jesus and I'm going to go through the hard, so if you're going to follow me, you're going to have to go through some hard. It takes that ethos and presents it to our work for racial justice. But there are 3 problems that really didn't sit right with me that made it difficult for me to figure out how to tend to this group and bring the work of belovedness to it. First, it focuses on systemic change, and interpersonal or interracial unity is secondary. If you're the right white person, if you're my kind of white person and you and I happen to end up being friends, cool, great. But did you go to that protest? Did you speak up? Are you challenging your pastor? Are you going to that school board meeting? Great, cool. Are you doing that? All right. Do I actually want to have a life-giving relationship with you? Maybe not. And see, the problem with that is, as a person of color, deeply committed to interracial unity, I can't do that. I can't say that I will determine whether or not I am in relationship with you based on how many racial justice hoops you jump through. That doesn't feel like that grace that racial reconciliation invites us into, that sense of community. The second problem with anti-racism is that it ignores or downplays the trauma response of white learners. So here's what I know. Violence begets violence. When we look at hard and horrible things, it will trigger something in us. I went to a funeral for my friend who I deeply loved, and the preacher got up and said, we are here to grieve our friend, but because we've opened the door for this grief, all of these other griefs that we are experiencing are going to come rushing right in. Anti-racism gives no space for us to sit with your trauma response. In the same way that I looked and saw people who looked like the people on my trip doing horrible things to people who look like me, the same way those sojourners with me were seeing people who look like them do horrible things to people who look like me. And we have to create space for that conversation, and anti-racism just doesn't do that. And then the last one is it creates obstacles for the church to be a witness of Christ-like love and unity. See, because if I'm not entering into this work fully seeing you as made in the image of God, in the same way that I hope that you enter into this work fully seeing me as made in the image of God, there is this underlying mistrust that will pop up in horrible ways along the way. Maybe in such a way that it shuts the work down altogether, and then we say, yeah, our church, we tried that, but it was just a phase. Or yeah, our pastor was excited about that, but the leadership was really upset about it. We were about it, but then we had a fight in leadership, and we were just like, we can't have this conversation and still tend to the church, so we're just not going to have this conversation. How are we doing with facilities, tending to the building? So when we do this work of anti-racism, we have got to find a new way that is defined by grit and grace. So what is this way? Well, like I said, I was sitting by that river and I realized that Dr. King was exploring this way of us becoming what he made popular, this idea of the beloved community. So the beloved community is an idea that was really popular with King when he was at Boston College. It was popular among the seminary students that he was interacting with, and it's rooted in the work of Josiah Royce, who was a sociologist and a philosopher. And beloved community is this idea that in order for people to live in harmony with each other and fully for each other and create sustainable change within this community, that there has to be a baseline belief and trust in their dignity, and the fact that they are made in the image of God, that their intrinsic worth, that they have intrinsic worth. There has to be this baseline agreement. And so the word that this baseline agreement that they use for this is beloved community. And so Dr. King, when he taught about the beloved community, he said that the end is the end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community. He goes on to say that this type of spirit and this type of love transforms opposers into friends. This type of love, I stress here, is not simply eros or an aesthetic or romantic love. And it's not philia, a sort of reciprocal love between two personal friends, but it is agape, which is understanding the goodwill of all men. It is an overflowing love, which seeks nothing in return. It is the love of God working in the lives of men. This is the love that may well be the salvation of our civilization. This right here, this invitation to become the beloved community, was what clicked in my head of the third way that we could pursue in doing this work, that holds the grace of we are made in the image of God. There is goodwill and good intentions and goodness in this space, that you matter and you are valuable in this work, and I will treat you with a level of respect and empathy. But you know what? We're not just going to stay here with the woo-woo good feelings. We're going to get in the water together. We're going to do this work together, because there's this baseline of trust and love, and we're going to save our civilization from the sin of white supremacy together. This is our North Star as we wade in the water. My friends, it's not more information, but a more curiosity about each other and how this collective consciousness of race and justice is affecting all of us. It's not more programs and initiatives, unless those programs and initiatives are the result of learning and listening to each other. And all this requires us to engage with Dr. King's legacy as loved and willing to be loved. In short, becoming the beloved community. So in his book, I'm going to just stand over here because I don't have it in my notes. Oh, actually, I do have it in my notes. Yay. In his book called The Beloved Community, Charles Marsh says of the beloved community, he says, King's concept of love was surely not the platitudinous all you need is love. See, that's the posture of reconciliation, racial reconciliation. It was rather the passion to make human life and social existence a parable of God's love for the world, a story that comes alongside each and every one of us on this journey of God's love for the world. It was agape, the outrageous venture of loving the other without conditions, a risk and costly sacrifice, grit and grace. So when I started teaching about racial reconciliation and anti-racism as this combination of these two ideas, I started to suggest that maybe we should consider ourselves as anti-racism peacemakers. Anti-racist because we actively oppose thoughts, beliefs, and actions that reinforce white supremacy. So we're leaning into that awareness. But we're peacemakers. We actively oppose thoughts, beliefs, and actions that reinforce oppression, shame, violence, in word, thought, and deed, and a lack of empathy. So an anti-racism peacemaker is a person who actively works towards a holistic restoration of the interpersonal, that racial reconciliation piece, and systemic, that anti-racism piece, effects of white supremacy through nonviolence and empathy. So this is when I started shifting the way that I teach my class by beginning my class with kind of what I said today. We're going to do a lot. Whenever I teach any sort of seminar or any sort of retreat, I say, we're going to learn. I am going to take you to key moments in our country where race and white supremacy bore its ugly head and people of color were affected because of it. We are going to look at that. But that's not the whole of this class. This class is going to be rooted in this agape love, this trust and belief in the goodness of one another. And so what I would do is I would say to my class, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take some deep breaths. See, there you go, spiritual director. We're going to take some deep breaths together. And I would say, okay, I say, breathe in and breathe out. Wow, that's a miracle. Every person in this room, with every feature and every skin tone, their lungs just did something miraculous. Let's breathe in again. And I said, let's breathe in and breathe out. And we breathe in and breathe out. I'm like, we did that together. There was a unity, a collective receiving of oxygen and exhaling together. Wow. And then I would say, okay, so we're going to begin this class and we're going to say three things. The first is, I am beloved. And so I'd ask them to say, I am beloved. And then I would say, okay, now look around the room and notice somebody else in this room. Look them in the eye and say, you are beloved. So then we look around and I'd encourage them to say, you are beloved. And then I'd say, okay, let's take one deep breath together, breathe in, breathe out, and stand up and say together, we are beloved. And what I notice in doing that is that when I focused on belovedness and bridging that gap, several things happened. That there was this aha moment for those people in the room whose discipleship is rooted in the work of Jesus, who follow Jesus. They realize, oh, this is like that thing that I learned in Matthew, the two greatest commandments, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. We're doing this. I'm like, yeah. And then what happened was it would disarm the skeptic. So the ones who are coming in the room like, okay, so you're just going to tell me how horrible it is that I'm white. I mean, I couldn't do anything about that. So go ahead, tell me, I'm ready. And I'm like, no, you're beloved. And invites in the weary. I've been doing this work for so long, and I feel so overwhelmed, and nothing is happening the way I want it to happen, and then I want to make things happen, but I'm white, so I can't, make it happen because, I want to be a good ally, and so I just want to give up. I'm so weary. And I'm like, no, you're beloved. You don't have to prove yourself in this space. And then it reframed our win. Were we able to have this conversation, learn this information, hold this information together in a way that was rooted in love and hope and deep empathy? Can you leave this room having a conversation with somebody about this work that affirms their belovedness, that is rooted in deep empathy? Can you do that? That's the win. Go to the protest, don't go to the protest, but stay tender. And I have found that the more I've taken away those stressors and made space for somebody to be fully human in this conversation, the Spirit comes in with all of their creativity, and amazing things happen that move us towards a more racially just world. And those things are sustainable because you're not trying to prove your worth in this work. So as we close, I'm going to invite us to do this practice that I do with my class. Because, my friends, I trust you, and I trust the Spirit. I trust Steve. And I know that whatever continuing conversations you have about racial justice here in your community will be good and meaningful. But I don't want you to get burned out. I don't want you to be harmed in it. I want you to first own your belovedness. So take a deep breath, breathe in, and breathe out. And breathe in again, and breathe out. May we be a people who first own our belovedness by saying together, I am beloved. But see, the thing is, it's not just about you, right? It's a community that we're forming and forging and tending to. So I want you to look around the room and look at somebody who you did not come here tonight with. I know it's awkward. We got awkward real quick. You can do it. Make eye contact with them. And out of that overflow of knowing you are beloved, breathe in, breathe out, and look at them and say with me, you are beloved. It's because we want to be people that own our belovedness and then proclaim the belovedness of each other so that we can be about the work of protecting belovedness. So when you're ready, stand up and breathe in with me. And breathe out. And look around the room and say, we are beloved. Yes, you, my friends, are an expression of the beloved community. Thank you.
Thank you, Osheta. That was a cool drink of cold water. Thank you so much. If you want to take do you want to take a
I'm
seat?
good.
Oh, you're going to stand. Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
So think about some questions that maybe this raised up for you or for our community. The goal of these conversations is to expand the way we think, not defend the way we think, right? So let's just all center ourselves in that. But let's also remind ourselves that we each are the beloved as we come with our questions, as we come with our wonderings and our curiosity, and I think that's a great starting place. So I'll just kick it off with a quick question. I loved how you ended, and part of it's in your book too, that you say, like, being the beloved, you really have to start with yourself, right? I mean, and I think for a lot of us, I think we tend to go, oh yeah, okay, got it. But now let's move on to the important work.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that we really know how to center ourselves in being the beloved for ourselves first. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions, practices that might help?
Yeah, so of the best anti-racism peacemakers that I know, they have a wraparound support. They have a community that tends to all those parts of their lived experience. So they have a spiritual director or a spiritual companion that they process. Okay, so I just read this thing and how to be anti-racist, and it just really hit me, and it just brought up like this thing about God, and so like they can sit and process that, because that's an important part of your lived experience, your mind, body, and soul. So your spirituality should be tended to in some way. They have a therapist that they meet with some frequency, not like every week, but like they have a therapist who knows their name and knows their trauma. And that they can say, I'm reading anti-racism, and this thing came up and my anxiety spiked, and now I feel like I got to do all the things, and the therapist can sit with you in that. And then when I'm talking to particularly white peacemakers, I then say, well, I say this about both, but when I'm talking to a room of mostly white people, I say, it's really good to have a space where you can say the hard thing of like, I really messed this thing up. And have people that will hold that with you and say, you are still beloved, you messed up, but get back in it. Or, I'm really trying to think this through, and I don't want to talk it over with my black coworker because that puts a pressure on them, but I still have all these questions, and you can explore it within community. Because the thing is there is a kindness to that of doing it with other white peacemakers, because you don't have that same sort of trauma that triggers when I am sitting with a white person who is not I'm doing the work of becoming a director because I want to sit with white peacemakers as this stuff comes up. If I am not committed to that person in that capacity, and they just come to me and they're asking me questions about race or something that happens in the news, I might not be in a good place. I might not have been able to sit with my director or my therapist or people of color who look like me that we can just say, thing's really hard. I might not be in that place, and I might not offer you the empathy that you deserve. But being in like an affinity space, having a small group of white peacemakers that you're particularly talking about racial justice, that's a space that you can be your full authentic self and not activate those triggers. So that's what I mean when I say do that interior work, is build that community of support around you so that you are whole when you step into this work, and then your work is more sustainable. And let me just say this one thing: when things don't go the way that you expect them to go, it doesn't ding you personally. It's not a direct attack to who you are as a person, to your belovedness, because you've worked it out in all these spaces.
Thank you, Osheta, so much. So helpful. We're going to turn it over to you for your questions. Just a reminder, we're recording this. That's why we're asking you to speak into the microphone. But also, you speaking into the microphone is your consent to be recorded. Okay? So Dan will cover this side, and I'll cover this side. If you have any questions, just raise your hand.
So I was listening to you, and I'm 72 years old, and I've always felt really deep in my heart that all people are created equal. If I were to start on the trail of becoming a peacemaker, do I have to do a lot more homework? I mean, I know a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I've read, I've seen it on TV, but I get this feeling that I need to study up, so to speak, so that I don't get into conversations, and maybe this is a negative, of saying, well, you just don't know, you don't know, you don't know, you don't know, you don't know, and I don't know. I mean, I know the basics that we were taught, and unfortunately, they're teaching less these days.
Right.
So, when you have it deep here, where do you begin?
Yeah. So what I would say, what was your name?
Penny.
Penny? Thanks for your question, Penny. So what I would say is that I'll tell you what I do when I come to work, when I come to a new resource, because I deeply believe we're all created equal, we're all made in God's image, and I don't want anything to shake that. That's a core belief of mine that I'm not willing to give up. But I do know that I'm about to read something or learn something that is going to show me how people have not been treated with that level of equality and care and love. And so when I come to that work, what I am doing is I am actually looking I'm looking for the ways that work is connecting some dots for me of like, so this person of color said this thing to me, but now I'm reading this and I'm realizing, so they probably didn't have the same sort of education that I had because of redlining, because their families were not able to get a home in a community close to a good school, and so they feel like they're always struggling with their education. So when I am encouraging you, Penny, to look at more work, or I say, yes, you should be open to learning more, but it's to look for connections to the lived experience of somebody, not indications or things that are like dinging their core value. Does that make sense? So it's a curiosity of like, how has this person experienced life, not a curiosity of this person is not, I believe that they're already equal, but they're saying that they have a lived experience that says it was hard, so then they must not know or own that they're equal. It's because they have an experience that has continually told them they're not equal, or they're not made in God's image. The other thing I would say to that, so look for the connections and have a curiosity about the lived experience. There are so many areas in our Western experience, in our world, or in America, where white supremacy has popped up. Okay? Housing, school, marriages, finances, violence, incarceration, like there's all these areas, right? What I say to somebody who's like, I want to learn more, but I'm scared that it's going to just take me down the spiral of shame or shake something that's core value to me, I say, well, what do you naturally come alive around? Do you come alive around family? Do you come alive around children? Do you come alive around education? Learn about the history of that experience for people of color and look for those threads of how white supremacy has affected their lived experience, because your natural interest in that topic will get you past some of those discomforts you'll have, because you already have some experience with that, and so your curiosity will kind of push you forward. Does that make sense? So don't feel like you have to learn all the things. Learn to sit with the Spirit and say, what am I naturally excited about? So like for me, I'm always excited about the contemplative spiritual lives of people. So then I have a lot of conversations about like, how did the church or people of faith interact with each other, and how were people of color not treated the same in spaces of faith? Does that make sense? Yeah, okay.
Before we go on to the next question, I know that some of you have programs where your kids are ending at 7:30. It's 7:30, so if you need to go, feel you can without any kind of shame. 7:30.
You are beloved.
You are beloved. Okay. Yeah, there was. Here, we'll go here first.
On Sunday, the message was regarding holding, lamenting, and grief. And I'd love for you to comment on the difference between holding shame, and holding lamenting.
Yeah. So was it Brene Brown? I always get it wrong, but it says that like shame, the difference between like shame and guilt is like I am bad or I did something bad. Yeah. So when I consider inviting white peacemakers into a space of lament, it is an invitation to sit with me in my most human moment. It is an invitation to share that grief with me. It's an invitation to bring your strength as a white person who that thing that happened didn't ding you in the same way it dinged me. To sit in that strength and hold me and hold that space. Lament is a collective, I see you and I'm sad for you. Or as I've taught, I'm listening and I'm sorry. I'm listening to the way that this thing has affected you, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry that this is your lived experience. I'm sorry. That's not shame. That's strength. That's community. That's saying I am as a beloved is sitting in this space and saying that you as a beloved are not experiencing life as beloved right now. And so the best spaces of lament are those spaces where we collectively turn to God and say, what the heck? This is not the way it should be. And we need you, God, and your strength to come sit with both of us. Shame or lament spaces that have been coined as lament, that have instigated shame, tend to do this thing of like, white people, what are you doing? Or like, white people, you should show up. So there tends to be, and the spaces that make me most uncomfortable are the call out spaces, where it's like, you're not doing enough, or you need to go out and talk to so-and-so. Like, a space that is truly for lament is that sitting in and holding. We want to have a conversation about what to do next. That's 2-3 days down the road after I've had some Haagen-Dazs, and after you've like taken some deep breaths and we come together and we've learned a little bit together, and now we're like, okay, let's make a strategy. How we do that. So I do not like spaces of lament that go straight from, God, what the heck, to now let's go out and do the work, because that's too soon. And that doesn't honor the healing journey that needs to happen. What was your name? Colleen. Thank you, Colleen. Does that help at all? That was very helpful. Okay, good.
Hi, I'm Ann.
Hey, Ann.
I have laryngitis and I have book group tomorrow night. So
Oh, I'm so sorry.
just don't worry, I'll be okay by tomorrow.
That's no fun.
So in preparation for this book group, I'm reading a book called The Second Mountain, and it's about how to find purpose and meaning. I just want to call out that one thing the author said that really rang true with me and what you said tonight was that everyone has this craving for intimacy without fear. And when you talked about belovedness and allowing people to be authentic and vulnerable without fear. It really reminded me of the many experiences I've had as a white peacemaker in holding back because of fear. So I just want to affirm that and say that really rang true for me. And then secondly, I've noticed that you use the terminology people with European features, and then sometimes you use the word white. And I wonder why you chose to use the word people with European features.
That's a good question, Anne. So here's the deal. One of the things that I have learned as I am companioning white peacemakers is that there is a disconnect from your culture, your family's culture, that has kind of that has happened with this idea of like white or American. Like, I will sit with a white person or a white peacemaker, and they'll say, "Oh, I'm just, my family's from Arkansas." And I'm like, "Great. So where were your ancestors who came to where are they from?" "Oh, I don't know. I think England." And I'm like, "Oh, so your family's culture of origin is rooted in England. That's something cool. That's interesting. Have you thought to explore that?" And the reason why that's important is because part of me stepping into this work as a fully whole person is saying I'm a Black woman, and there is a cultural experience that comes with me being a Black woman. There's history, there's practices, traditions that form me, and part of me living as a woman of color in different spaces is stepping into that and owning that. White people don't have that. And so when I am encouraging a white peacemaker to enter into that space of curiosity of what is my lived experience, well, my lived experience is deeply connected to culture. So I want to give you a reciprocal opportunity to explore what is your culture? What are the things that your grandmother did that you're like, that was strange, and then you look back and you're like, oh, that was Lithuanian, okay? I'm like, yeah. See, and I think because the reason why I do that is because we are all a whole story. And when I say people of European features, it's my way of saying I recognize that you are a whole, there's a story behind you. And I'm holding that curiosity for that story in the same way that I hope you hold curiosity for my story.
That's what I was confirming, and I really liked that idea.
Thanks.
White people are often just grouped together as one chunk of
Yeah, and you're not. And the problem with that is when we group any sort of group together, then we lean into some of our prejudices and biases because we've lost that curiosity for the individual cultures and stories within that group.
So then how do you respond to lumping all Black people into one?
Same sort of way. Because see, here's the thing. My mom is Black, but she is from Michigan, but her family is from North Carolina. My dad is Black, but he's from Indiana, and his whole family is Indiana. I am Black, but I spent most of my life in Texas, but my most formative years happened in Boston. So there are different ways that my Blackness looks different than my mom's Blackness because she has that Midwest and then that Deep South. My dad had none of that Deep South. He had all of the stories of his family leaving the South and coming to the North. That's a part of who he is. And so this is why I say spaces for people of color to come together and tell their stories is important, but spaces for people with European features to come together and tell their stories is important too. So can I tell one small story? Okay, so this past Christmas, this one past Christmas, so my husband is Irish and Jewish, and I'm obviously African American, and our children, because we deconstructed a lot of stuff in our faith when they were little, they're older and they're kind of faith, I don't know. I like Jesus the rebel, but do I want to do contemplative practices and follow Jesus? I don't know. That's where my kids are. And that's really hard for me to say as a pastor, but it is what it is. And so, but we wanted to reclaim some of those spiritual practices that were really beautiful for us as a young family around Advent without the triggers and weird stuff that comes up in my kids who have seen how sausage is made in churches. When we do our Advent practices. So I sat with my husband at the beginning of the fall and I was like, okay, there's something beautiful when we come together at the table and talk about our core values. Christmas is when our kids are used to it, but Advent has kind of been this thing where they just sit through it or they don't come at all. So I said, how about we do this? You are Irish and you are Jewish. but you have not explored those parts of yourselves. And I'm African American, but I've never done Kwanzaa. So how about we have a whole holiday, a multicultural holidays, where we did Celtic Advent. So we started Advent on November 15th. We had Celtic practices through our Advent season. And we would say, this is about Jesus, but it's also how your dad's ancestors observed the season. And then we did Hanukkah. And my kids were so cute because they were walking around singing, Baruch atah Adonai. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like we don't speak Hebrew, but you're singing it, all right. And then we did Kwanzaa. And it was this beautiful moment of like, we have all these stories and richness that make us who we are. And I think that is, when I talk about this and as we talk about anti-racism, that's the joy and the aha and the curiosity that I hope we can recapture when we do this work.
So,
Okay. What's your name?
My name is Judy.
Judy, hi.
So after we've gone through the process of learning and sitting in the grief, do you have examples of churches that have actually done something about institutional racism? Because almost all of the roots from all the books I've read have to do with laws and rules.
Yeah.
And when you get into laws and rules, that becomes political.
Yeah.
But if you don't change those roots, nothing is ever going to change. So
Yeah.
I'm more interested in how do we change as a church? How do we get together to figure out what we're going to do about it?
Yeah. Judy? So I love your question, Judy, but I want to offer maybe a different way of thinking about what's next. So the question that I would ask any church that is starting to have conversations around race and realizing we need to do something is, who are the leaders, the faith leaders of color in your community you're having an ongoing dialogue with about how white supremacy or racism or systemic brokenness, however you want, whatever word, how that is showing up for their congregation? Because they're going to have way more insight about what's happening and what they want to see changed than you will, because it's not your lived experience. Listen, I don't know anything about CrossFit, okay? So I'm not going to walk into a CrossFit studio and say, like, I watched some videos and now I'm going to do CrossFit, because I will throw up, and I don't want to throw up in public, and that's a bad look, and we get nothing done. What I want to do is I want to sit with a CrossFit teacher and say, this is what I'm learning about CrossFit. It's a workout. It's a type of workout. This is what I'm learning. This is what I want to do. Can you show me how in my body I can do a burpee, which is this thing that you do? Don't ask me, because that's hard. But so what I'm saying is, the question then is, so you've learned something. Now do you take that, what person of color, what leader of color have you taken that to, who's rooted in your community? Like, I live in St. Paul, so I'll sit and hold space with you, but I don't know what goes on here in Wayzata. So you need to talk to somebody who's rooted here to say, you know what, actually, there's a school board meeting that's happening, and some of my congregants are very concerned about the conversation around CRT there. Can you come as a community and use your voice? Or, we are struggling with this thing in our community, like, how about we partner? Maybe we have youth and we don't have a whole lot of support for our parents, so how can we maybe do some sort of parenting thing together, where like you who have a lot of resources and a lot of energy around parenting can maybe come alongside and support our community. So the question isn't what can we do, but who can we come alongside? And when you do that, that leaves space for the Spirit to say, hey, you can do this thing now, but now it's done in that spirit of beloved community, that spirit of agape love, because you're listening to the person whose life will actually be affected by whatever change you do together. So, because the thing we have to remember about racial injustice or racial justice is that we are binding up an ancient relational problem. This is relational healing, so it has to be done in relationship.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
I had a question. I had a question about teaching young children history and banning of books. It really bothers me because they feel that when you ban these books, they don't want to have the children feel guilty. And that really disturbs me a lot when I hear that.
Yeah. So this is something that I have a lot of grief around, because I think that when I listen to politicians talk about this who are for banning these resources, what I hear is their deeply protective spirit for their children. And like, I want my children to know that they are loved, and I'm worried that the way that this is being taught is going to affect that. What I would love to see are more conversations where the teachers, the ones who are in the room, can walk through with parents and say, this is how I'm teaching this. These are the books that I'm reading. This is the core of what I'm trying to explain, because we have to be able to be curious about each other's stories. And then I would love to see more, and I know so many teachers who do this already, but do like deeply humanity or human affirming practices with their kids of like, you are good, you are loved. They do that already in their curriculum. And so when I hear somebody who's really resistant to it, the first thing is I affirm that, like, yes, you are deeply concerned about your child. Do you have the capacity to sit with your teacher and actually learn how they're teaching it? And then maybe if you're concerned about the way something is coming across, maybe you can have a conversation with them about that. But like, the teachers are really the ones who are sitting in the classroom who are doing this, and they understand a child's formation better than I do, you know. So that is the conversation that I hope we can start having at more local levels, and the kind of support we can offer our teachers who are doing this work in their own lives and feel like it's important for them to bring that to their students' classrooms. Because I deeply think that we can't have a good conversation about not bullying if we also don't have a conversation about how people have been harmed in a variety of different ways over the course of history. Those two things don't seem to live together.
Well, okay, one more, Tan? Okay.
Yeah.
One more.
Hi, so
Hi.
I'm Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
My daughter is almost 13, she's black, and I feel like, I'm gonna cry now. I feel like I've spent a lot of my life having these conversations with her and giving her mentors, and recently, because now she's almost 13, and nothing I say makes sense to her,
Yeah.
she started to tell me, you don't understand, you're not black, you can't understand.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to say beyond, you're right. I'm not, and I don't. And I desperately want to connect with her in that way, but I don't know how. And I just wonder, is part of this just acknowledging that right now what I can do is just to say, I can't understand.
So, Rachel, I'm sorry. It's really hard. Two things that pop in my head, because I have a 20-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 17-year-old. That is spot on for a 13-year-old. Just so like you don't get it, but the weight of it, because it's rooted in race, the stakes feel higher for you. So I just want to say it's normal, but then there's also this little piece that makes it feel like more. What I would say is a couple of things. One, what type of support, and when I say support, like women of color who are in your orbit on a regular basis, I think part of the frustration you might be feeling coming off of her is she might feel like, who are the friends that you are talking to? And who are you turning to them they can hold that sadness with you? Because I think I've noticed I have a teen who picks up on my sadness and my anxiety like that, and then he pushes really hard because he's like, I'm not going to hold that with you, Mom. And so then it's my job to be like, oh, no, there's somebody else that needs to hold that. So there might be a little bit of that. I don't know your daughter. There might be a little bit of that of like, well, Mom, like, I need for you to talk about like race stuff with other women that's not me. And then the other thing I would say around that is so my daughter is biracial, but she passes. So she looks white. But she has leaned super, super hard into her black identity. And so I've followed her into that. And so I'm like, who are you listening to? What are you reading? Who are the influencers you're following? Like, what like using the language, like I showed solidarity with her, and that was really easy because I'm Black, so like she felt like she was welcomed into a community of Black women. But like for you, maybe showing that solidarity and being like, who are you listening to? What are you doing? There's a woman in our church who has adopted 2 Ethiopian children. She's white, and she's sat in those same spaces, and I've watched her make sure that there's a constant, I don't want to say stream, or constant presence of Black women, myself as being one of them, in and around her children to go so that they can see themselves in those women. But then also she turns to me and she's like, I don't know. I don't know what I don't know. And then the other thing is she's leaned really hard into paying attention to the ways that they're exploring their Black identity. Because what's going on with your daughter right now is she's like, what does it mean to be Black in a white space? And so she's struggling with that only thing. And then she feels like she can't really fully get there with you because she doesn't want to hurt your feelings. But then she also you don't have so much shared language. And I can talk to you more about that afterwards. I'll stick around. But what's happening with your daughter, I've experienced as a 13-year-old in a mostly white space. I've watched my teenagers push back, and I'm just so sorry. I have a lot of tenderness for where you are.
Thank you, Osheta. And thanks, Rachel, for that vulnerable question. Let's thank Osheta for being here tonight. And I do want to highlight her book, Dear White Peacemakers. It is incredible. It's really helpful. Her first book is really helpful as well, Shalom, Sisters, and because this idea of shalom is central to your work.
Yeah.
And so make sure to dive into that. And thank you all for coming. Thank you all for being here. Next week is Disability Justice with Craig Spofford, and then Kevin will be back in 2 weeks talking about housing justice. And then Ellie Krug in 3 weeks from now. I have asked Kristen Jaidy to give the blessing, the closing blessing, just on a spur, and she said yes. And so I probably shouldn't have asked her, but I just wanted you to pray us out, Kristen. So thank you.
Thank you, Osheta. Let's pray. God, we give you thanks for gathering us uniquely this evening in a way we'll probably never be gathered together in quite the same way again. We thank you for the coming of your Spirit to be among us, within us, and moving us forward. Thank you for Osheta and her willingness to extend herself to us and to be with us and to bring your message and give us light on the path for our next steps. Thank you for Steve and Dan and all the other leaders who've made this evening possible. As we go, help us to lift our eyes to you, to lift our hearts to you, to begin before rushing off with just being in your presence and being grounded in our belovedness and trusting that you will show us the next step to take for each of us. We pray for your healing grace to be with us, to go with us, and to bring healing to our communities, our country, our world. Thank you for calling us to follow Jesus, and we put our trust in him as we go from this place tonight. May we go with your peace. We pray it in his name, who goes with us and before us in all things. Amen.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.